Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to BiblioTech On Air. I'm Rosanna.
I'm Michelle.
And today we have Lauren with us. If you remember from one of our previous episodes, we did have her on with us to discuss Stephen King's book, The Shining. So thank you for joining us today, Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's always great. We really enjoy these book discussions, and it's fitting for the one we're going to discuss because it's, spoopy month, Halloween, and all that. So today we're going to be getting into Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, the sequel in the Shining series. This one came out 30 plus years after the original came out. But yeah, we'll do a quick little summary about it. Real quick, also for anyone wondering, it is available on cloudLibrary in ebook format. So if you want to check that out after listening to this episode, by all means, use that. And if you haven't signed up for a library card with us already, make sure you do so. Alrighty, so about Dr. Sleep. On highways across America, a tribe of people called the True Knot travel in search of sustenance. They look harmless, mostly old, lots of polyester, and married to their RVs. But as Dan Torrance knows, and spunky 12-year-old Aber Stone learns, the True Knot are quasi-immortal, living off the steam that children with the Shining produce when they are slowly tortured to death. Haunted by the inhabitants of the Overlook Hotel, where he spent one horrific childhood year, Dan has been drifting for decades, desperate to shed his father's legacy of despair, alcoholism, and violence. Finally, he settles in a New Hampshire town, an AA community that sustains him, and a job in a nursing home where his remnant shining powers provide the crucial final comfort for the dying. All right. So with that, I think we could go ahead and get into these questions. Michelle, if you want to start us off.
So, Dan Torrance's journey. Years after surviving the Overlook, Dan is hunted by his ghost and by his father's legacy of alcoholism. How does Dan's personal demons and his path to sobriety, working as Dr. Sleep at a hospice, shape his character's development?
The fact that, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but the fact that, he was finally able to, he spent so much of his life and a good early portion of the book trying to mute his ability, trying to keep it, just wrapped away through his alcoholism, his habits. The fact that he was able to finally put it to good use to actually helping people. I think that was something really, because with from what I know about addiction, it always helps to find some a good habit to kind of,
like a routine?
Like a routine,
Yeah.
yes. And with this is kind of that routine that he needed, something to help him this gift of mine, it's more of a gift and not a curse, thankfully. So I'm able to put this to use and help people instead of having it, just kind of be this negative thing that's always surrounded me and been kind of the root cause of everything bad that's happened to me up until now.
Yeah, I was going to say, he spends decades drifting through different communities and whatnot, and him suppressing his abilities, when previously, I believe, in The Shining, his mother was always no, let's, show your Shining or whatever. And so now, for a while, a couple of decades, he's suppressing it and everything. And now he has this new nickname called Dr. Sleep. That is quite symbolic to his new reframing of life, on top of the fact that he goes to AA and he's, I wouldn't say religious with it, but he tries to be, what's the word? Faithful to it.
Diligent?
Yes. Versus his dad, during The Shining, his dad had behavior that was going off and on it. So you can tell that's probably him being no, I got to stick to this. If I want to survive, I got to stick to this. So I think that was an interesting insight to see how he's kind of fighting against being this his father, I guess you can say generational trauma almost.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was interesting.
Oh yeah. It's very clear that Dan's journey here pretty much throughout the book is all about healing. I feel from his dad's shadow, and then like just the overall ghost from his past. You can see that he's healing, trying to go a different path. What did I like? I feel like he's in this um hospice work, helping people pass peacefully, and it almost gives him more of like a sense of meaning,
Mm-hmm.
kind of turning more of that pain into empathy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely saw that.
Yeah, because it's nice to see him do it not only with himself, but like for, his patients and stuff. All right, so next question. All right, addiction and recovery. Dr. Sleep places addiction and recovery front and center, with Dan attending AA meetings and struggling daily to stay sober. How did the novel portray the impact of alcoholism on Dan's life and his road to recovery? What message do you think King is conveying about breaking the cycle of substance abuse? I mean, that one's interesting because from what we know about Stephen King, like he was a massive addict, massive addict. I think like alcoholism, coke, pretty much all those 70s, 80s, like big heyday kind of drugs. So it's interesting to see how much of that definitely plays into like how he writes Dan, because I'm sure he 100% pulled from experience, even though there's a moment in the book where Dan's like, oh no, cocaine's not for me, like I'm an alcoholic,
Yeah.
but still, I mean,
Mhm.
addiction is addiction at the end of the day. And
It's also interesting too. Sorry, like
oh, you're
it's
good.
interesting to see too. I'm sure. I think I had read it somewhere once, but I think there was like a small article that had said Stephen King was aware of his addiction, and therefore I think he may have told his kids like, this is something that is in our family. Just be aware of it and try not to like fall
Mhm.
through my steps. So I think that's interesting that if that is true, that he has that history, or that he wants that. And then also too, when you think about The Shining and Danny breaking away from his father and breaking away from everything that his father represented towards the end of Dan's life, his father, so like addiction, terror, blah 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 blah. It is interesting to see him show like King convey that through other symbolic manners. I guess like
Mhm.
PTSD,
Yeah.
for an example, and just breaking relationships. Like his mom's not there
Right.
anymore.
He loses his whole support
Yeah.
system. Like his mom dies, Halloran dies. He literally has no one. And so, that makes it easy for him to just fall apart and
Be
give into like
destructive.
these kind of dark impulses. Because even his dad, with like the support system of, maybe his coworkers, his wife, his son, that still didn't stop him from being like a kind of terrible person.
Yeah, like y'all were saying, I think he really pulls from his own experience. He really like humanizes the struggle of addiction. And I think they kind of make it obvious in the book that there's just no real quick fix, not like an overnight transformation. Like Dan's recovery takes work, and he's
Mm-hmm.
gonna he he just the way King portrays it is I mean it's real. It feels so real almost. And then yeah, I mean it sounds like it's coming from, and also like you mentioned too, like the lifelong act of just being in this recovery for him, and like you said, kind of healing from also this generational trauma, um and how that was affected by addiction. So
All right. And so going into the legacy of Jack Torrance, as we mentioned, Danny definitely carries a lot of generational trauma from his father. Although Jack is gone, his presence looms large. How does Jack Torrance's legacy influence Dan's choices? For example, Dan's fear of becoming like his father, or the literal appearance of Jack's ghost in the finale.
How he makes peace with the ghost at the end, right? With his father's ghost. Because
Yes.
the
yeah.
ghost helps him in a way. So I think that's an interesting like take on perhaps, I don't know if maturity is the right word, but his relationship or his feelings on his father. Perhaps maybe he has a better understanding now of his father now that he's older and he's gone through addiction, and whatnot. So I think there's that. And then, I mean, we briefly talked about this, but his fear of becoming his father. So yeah, like he is attending AA meeting. And I also feel he's constantly trying to run away from this this issue that he feels is following him. And I don't know. I don't know. You guys can argue with me on this, but I feel like the dad wasn't always running away from issues. Like in a weird way, I feel like he was also confronting them.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, I kind of, well,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
oh no, sorry. No, I was just saying, I mean, I definitely saw the ending confronting his Jack as like symbolic. Um it almost is like Dan has to finally face what he's been running from his whole life. So instead of just like repeating his father's mistakes, he really breaks pattern. And we see that like when he chooses like sacrifice or empathy and protection, and the kind of almost like opposite of what we saw Jack's choices were when he was at the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. So I think it's just kind of like a cathartic moment because it's not really it's not really about like confronting the ghost. It's more about like how Dan's able to kind of reclaim his own like identity
Yeah.
from who his father was. So that's how kind of how I saw it.
Interesting.
Beautifully put. I love that,
Yeah.
reclaiming his identity, because so much of that is tied to his dad in a way. And
Yeah.
I can kind of see it like how you were saying too, where it's like Jack, he didn't really like run away from things. He would just kind of be like, okay, let's just do the thing head on or whatever. And then
Like I need to get the hotel, the Outlook. He was like, no, I need to get this done. Like when he was talking to his coworker or whatever that also goes to AA or whatever, and he was like, are you sure you want to do this? He's like, no, I need a job. Like I need to get it done. Yeah, he was very like set on I need to get it. I need to do it. Yeah.
which I guess that kind of like goes back to like Dan. He probably saw that as like his dad being maybe confrontational. Again, I'm just inferring here, but confrontational, and he already had trauma from his dad, like being abusive.
That's right.
So as a kid, you kind of put two and two together, and you're like, that's not a good thing. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
That poor baby has gone through so much. Like, even considering all like the terrible choices he made that we read about in the book, it's still like hard to be like, dude, you're just kind of being like, mini Jack Torrance. You're like, no, he's a sympathetic character. He remains a sympathetic character through pretty much most of the book.
Even too, Dan's experience with the baby, right? The lady he steals from her, I believe, or something.
Deanie, and I think the baby's name is Tommy.
Yeah, and so like it shows that, I don't know if I would say slight, but it shows that emotion of compassion that he has for that one moment. Because I noticed also it drags on throughout the scene until like the next scene.
It really does.
Yeah. So that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very conflicted about it, and he hears like his mom's voice in his head. Which, do y'all think, little side question, but do y'all think he's actually like hearing their voices like from the beyond because of his shining, or do you think it's just like a little moment of like psychosis, like his subconscious projecting like right and wrong?
Maybe both.
Yeah. Yeah, I never thought about that. I was thinking it as like his own conscious.
Yeah, that's how I thought it. But now that I think about it, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
He
but
does
I
have
didn't
a
think about it
shining.
being part of. Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, I think we can get to the next question if you don't mind reading number
Yeah.
4.
So this one's about Dan and Abra's relationship. What did you think of the bond between Dan and Abra? How does this mentor-student and later uncle-niece relationship develop trust and affection? And in what way does this help heal other people's wounds or each other's wounds or influence each other's growth throughout the story? Well, I'll start with this. So I'll acknowledge that we find out throughout the book that Dan and Abra are related through Danny. Through Danny's father.
Yes.
Sister, half brother.
Abra's mom is his half sister, so that makes him Abra's uncle. Half uncle.
So
whatever.
Yeah. So I found that interesting that like because they have that history, perhaps it's that shining has grown stronger and that yeah, that's why they're able to connect and I guess
Mm-hmm.
like telepathically stuff, like emotions,
Yeah.
not just connecting, but yeah.
Yeah.
I thought the same, like, and it's interesting because it's like they almost don't, for me, I was like, it starts off like Dan feels maybe like he's too broken to really help anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then he starts becoming like this mentor, and it's like it almost, I mean, it really does give him like a reason to stay sober and just to keep fighting, which I like that aspect of it. I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was really like, you know, touching. um,
Yeah.
and then I feel on the other end, Abra, she is like, so like Dan's getting this kind of family connection, and then she's getting, of course, like that guide who to someone who is truly understanding her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of funny when you think about like how they met because they didn't really meet face to face. Like the way their relationship developed was purely like that
Psychic.
psychic, metaphysical connection.
Hmm, hmm.
And it also goes back to like when Lauren was telling Danny like, the way I mentored you, one day you're going to find someone
That's
that you're
right.
going to end up mentoring, looking after as well. So just make sure you take to heart everything that I've taught you. And it's evident like how much of that he really does take to heart when he finally meets Abra and he's like, okay, this girl. And when they later on realize that they're family, he's like, this girl, I've got to make sure like she's safe. She knows what she's doing. And also just like taking their different upbringings into perspective. Because not saying that like Danny, when he was showing his signs of the shining, like he was a bit more like internalizing them. Meanwhile, Abra, she was
Hmm,
allowed kind of more to play with them.
Yeah.
I mean, Danny's mom was
hmm.
supportive, like you said. She would be like, let it out, it's fine. But I mean, because of his dad, he was in
It
fear.
was limited.
But then we see like again with Abra, like her grandma, her parents just being like really supportive, just kind of like a kid who's playing with their toys and like do what you want, just don't make a mess.
So the part that I
Mm,
find
yeah.
interesting, it says like, in what ways do they help heal each other's wounds, or influence each other's growth through the story throughout the story? I remember thinking, like, yes, Abra is quite young, but she still has a childlike touch to her, and I feel sometimes as an adult we lose that, and perhaps like when we grieve or when we're sad, when we have tough emotions, we sometimes need that young side, that childlike state, to help us guide out of it or navigate through it. Because usually,
Mm,
like as a kid, you're quite naive about these things. And I think perhaps having Abra there with him helped him navigate like this whole place and help him realize like just how strong it was, because I think if he would have heard it from an adult, say if somebody were to be like, Dan, you're a strong person, I know you can do this, I'm sure he would have been flippant towards it, versus if it's a kid, most kids
yeah,
don't really lie, they
true.
tell
Yeah,
truth. So I thought that was
That's
another
true.
another interesting relationship dynamic that helped them. Yeah.
that's good. I didn't really think about it from that perspective. That kind of innocent childlike wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always thought that too, because I feel, yeah, like I surround myself with adults like most people. Like I'm an adult, I'm not going to surround myself with kids unless I have kids, but I have
Mm-hmm.
nephews, and when I do spend time with them, like I can have a rough day, but if I go spend time with them, for an example, like they're not thinking about what I'm thinking about, they're thinking about silly things and just
Hmm.
calling each other booty face, and I'm like, yeah,
Well, look
booty
out, like,
face. Yeah,
as a
so
mom of three under five, let me tell you that kids will humble you.
yes,
And you're so
yeah,
right. They will tell it like it is.
yes.
And yeah, and it's so funny because I mean, much like I feel like in a sense, very elderly people, and maybe these are people
Oh,
that me and
yeah.
came across in hospice, but elderly people start becoming more blunt and telling it like it is, just like a toddler would. So
Mm-hmm.
both
That's
sides, I feel,
interesting.
yeah.
I like that connection, yeah, with even like the hospice. I didn't think of
Yeah.
that. That's so true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly.
Because I've heard people too, like say when they get into hospice or like that type of um, job career, they're like, yeah, I just like working with older people. They're just nice. Or they're just different. I
Hmm.
connect with
Like,
them. So yeah,
yeah,
that is an
yeah,
interesting insight. Yeah.
Yeah, or like when people are getting older, it's like I'm raising them again,
Yeah,
that kind
yeah,
of little
yeah.
joke
yeah,
that.
yeah. Real quick side note, because I just been thinking about this the whole time, and especially when I was reading this book. Um, my dad is actually a hospice social worker.
Oh.
So I have heard, of course, and he's a second generation social worker because his mom was a social worker.
Oh, wow.
And I won't get into the whole specifics of things, but my dad comes from a line of some generational trauma from his own father, my late grandfather. And so it's just so crazy. I'm like, do these people go into a hospice for a reason? Um,
Oh,
no,
that's
but I
interesting.
mean, and hearing some of the stories like that my dad talks about, I mean, not that he shares a whole bunch
Yeah.
from his work, right? But um it is everything the way Dan explains it. I mean, you're helping people not more like towards the end of life, but really the main thing is just helping them feel so comfortable towards the end of
Mm-hmm.
life. And so I just kept going back and forth, and I kept like I would message my dad, and I'm like, oh, I'm literally reading a book right now that my dad's not a big reader, but I'm like, if you read a book, this would be it because there's so much talk about hospice and end of life care. So that I just kept making those connections.
So, speaking of, what I will say, because we talked about death and mortality, I'll jump to death and mortality. So, Stephen King reads the theme of mortality throughout the book. Dan's hospice work involves comforting the dying, which is what you brought up about your dad, while the true knots are terrified of sleep and go to monstrous lengths to avoid it. What observation does Dr. Sleep make about death and dying? That is
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're total opposite ends of the spectrum right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially like what I found was interesting. The true knots, right? They contact
Mm-hmm.
measles, and that's how they start dying out,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know they
Remember?
contact something from one of the little boys, so they start dying out. But their whole thing is like, yeah, are afraid of dying. Like they want to be infinite. And Dan, it seems like he's not necessarily ready to retire through life, but he's accepted that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like death and mortality, which I'm sure you'll say too about your dad, that it is
Mm-hmm.
inevitable and you can't avoid it. And it's just a matter of
Mm-hmm.
accepting peace with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I like yeah, it's instead of, treating death as something to fear, I
Mm-hmm.
like how King kind of shows it as, it's something natural and it could even be peaceful. So, and Dan's hospice work, of course, shows, yeah, that death is a part of life. It's just
Mm-hmm.
something that we just have to face, but we can do so with compassion. Um, and then, yeah, the true knots, their terror of dying is just kind of what makes them monstrous, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, yeah, that's how I feel about it.
And speaking of this, yes, I will say King does show through the hospice and like Danny that death can be a peaceful thing, that it isn't something necessarily to always be fighting, but it is interesting to see through the true knots that they don't see it like that. They see it very painful and
Hmm.
they don't want to make peace with it. And then you also are exposed to the
Hmm.
horrible, yeah, deaths of the little kids that they take the
Yeah.
shinings from. So yeah, that would
Hmm.
even make it scary because you would think like, why would I want to die? Like I'm just gonna be fighting and screaming at the end of my time. Like if
Hmm.
that were to happen to me. So it's
Yeah.
a interesting look that Stephen King puts in this novel with having a fear of death and then also a sort of come to terms with death, like a retired soul that's ready to go.
Right, because when you're afraid of death, well, obviously look at how you're causing these deaths. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're torturing these kids
Hmm.
and, taking what's essentially like, their metaphysical life, psychic essence from
Mm-hmm.
them. Like, yeah, that's going to be a bad thing, no matter how you put it. Like,
Yeah.
and that's going to look terrifying to anyone, regardless of your okay with death or,
Yeah.
trying to actively prevent it like they are. So it's like you're essentially becoming the thing that you fear
Yeah.
in a way. Not 100%, but
Yeah, no, I can understand that. But yeah. So horror, so since we're talking about that, with sort of Stephen King presenting different types of death and so my next question will change to horror versus the thriller tone of this novel.
Mm.
So in Doctor Sleep, it's often seen as a less psychologically intense than The Shining, leaning more towards a supernatural thriller. Do you find this book scary? Why or why not?
that's definitely like evident the moment like you kind of get a few chapters into Doctor Sleep. Like The Shining, same thing. It was kind of that slow build up, but it did have that horror element where like it wasn't scary, but like there was just kind of that overwhelming sense of dread that was building up just because
Yes.
like you knew things were going to
Mhm.
get worse and worse and
Mhm.
worse. Meanwhile, like for Doctor Sleep, personally, it didn't really feel like there were, of course, the supernatural themes there, and like you knew bad things were going to happen, but it wasn't necessarily like kind of that horror, that feeling of dread that like was creeping up in the book.
I also wonder
Yeah.
too how much, like, given Stephen King's history of addiction, particularly drinking, I wonder how much of this was sort of like a Stephen King way of memorializing him coming to terms with him being sober for so long,
Like the spot he
maybe.
was in versus like kind of where
Yeah,
he's at
yeah,
now.
and healing
Mhm.
that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good
Maybe.
point.
I mean, yeah, again, I didn't, find this particularly as, I guess, scary as The Shining, or it didn't have that same like claustrophobic or like
Hmm.
psychologically tense
Mm-hmm.
feel. It definitely was more haunting, I guess, in the sense that it was emotionally, and I guess not like jump scares or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It just the way the fear came across as more of like from the loss or from like the addiction. The true knots were a little creepy,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I think Dan's real struggle with just finding peace was like the
Hmm.
most like haunting, I guess, thing from the story. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
that.
it felt more like it was kind of in a weird way about healing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because with a lot of
Mhm.
like these books and stuff, it's one and done. Like at the end of The Shining, I remember it kind of like vaguely portrays a happy ending for Danny and
Mhm.
his
Yeah.
mom, but then we dive into like,
Is-
okay, well, that's actually not where the story ends. It's a continuation of the trauma that's going to haunt him
Yes.
and just like, what to do when you're kind of like, one of the only people who has these specific abilities
Abilities.
and these unique situations that you've been through.
Yeah.
So it was kind of nice to see like, how it what didn't necessarily take the horror aspect for that. Still kind
Yeah.
of weirdly in a way, a nice little book about, not nice book, but like a book about
It was
healing.
a nice, but
It was a nice book,
yeah.
the sacrifices and the
Yeah.
trauma were just,
Should we jump to
it's,
the ending?
it's not a nice book. I'm so sorry.
It is actually a good. I loved it. I loved the book.
like
I
not
really
So
did.
not a
it's
nice
so
book
funny
in
that we're
like go ahead. I'm
it's
so
funny
sorry.
because ironically, I think I'm enjoying this discussion about parts of the book more than the book itself because I truly struggled with this one.
Really?
Like I did. I don't know if it's because I feel like more of it dragged for me. And then like when it did come to like the really important points, I was like locked in. But I think it was like all the other fluff or like all the other like
Oh yeah.
stuff that took me out of the story. Like when it was emotional parts or it was like even parts between like Dan and Alba, like I was like, okay, let's get into the good emotional
Hmm.
like stuff. But I don't know. I could not keep up with like the flow of the book, I guess you could say. So when we're talking about like these little parts of the book, like I'm like, yes, that was a good part. That was a good part. But then when I think about my entire reading
Overall
experience as
experience.
a whole, I was like, it fell flat.
Wow.
Totally
So
valid. I mean,
Yeah.
I get that because sometimes I feel like the shift in perspective, while it wasn't a bad thing because it did kind of like make everything tie together, it did kind of
it
like,
did
when
tie
we jumped
together.
from like Dan to just like the true knot and then Abra, it's like,
I
you
think it was
kind of
busy.
taking
That's
me.
maybe what it was for me.
And I think that's why
Yeah.
I liked it, because I love busy. I don't like,
Okay. There
yeah,
we
for an
go.
example, I didn't like The Shining because
Mm-hmm.
it was just nothing but him narrating, I felt, unnecessary stuff. And Carrie, too, it's a short novel, but yet I felt the same way. What's the other one with the vampires that he made?
Salem's Lot.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Salem's Lot. Oh my God. I
Oh
was like
yeah.
halfway through and I felt like I still hadn't even started, but I felt like with The Shining, and I did see the movie
Yeah.
before I read the book. Um, I had
Mm.
read the book and I really liked the movie, and I listened to the audio. I'm sorry. So I listened to the audio book of Dr. Sleep. And I think
Mhm.
that's what helped, because I really did like the movie, and I'm somebody who pictures words and stuff.
Yeah.
So having
Hmm.
that, I think, was easier on top of listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for The Shining. I had seen the movie first, then I read the book, and it helped get me to the
Yeah.
end. This one I kind of went in blind. I know it's a movie, a show. It's a movie,
Movie,
right?
Movie,
yeah.
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 It's a movie. So I have plans, of course, to watch it now. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think it'll kind of fill in the blanks, or like kind of
Makes sense
tie up some of
more.
those like loose ends where I'm like, what is going on? Because I know they were and I'm not one to even read big books. So
Same.
I'm like, I have to keep that in mind too, that I'm like, oh man, okay, I gotta stay invested in this one. So yeah, I think the discussion on the book for me is a lot better than my experience reading
Yeah.
it. But the points that he made, I mean, these points were so good. And like, I feel like maybe, I mean, it was necessary. I mean, it's just a nice closure, I guess.
Yeah.
30 years later or
Yeah.
whatever. It's just nice closure.
Yeah, because I feel you don't often get that, as particularly when it comes to successful cult-like horror
Mm-hmm.
novels and stuff. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
can keep saying, "Oh, I would love to have a Carrie sequel," but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean Stephen King
Right.
stuff. And also too, and I'm not saying this with disrespect, but because people say this often, where they're like, "We didn't ask for a sequel."
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
like, I don't
Yeah.
I don't know if we had asked for a sequel of The Shining. That being said, I'm quite glad that he did make a sequel, because I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed more of the story itself and the
Mm-hmm.
fast paced of, like, just
Mm-hmm.
this happens, this happens, this happens. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice when
Mm-hmm.
it happens naturally too, because sometimes people might churn out a sequel just because they're like, oh, look, this book or this movie did really well.
Call Me by Your
Um,
Name.
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to get
Army
into that
Army
right now,
Hammer.
but but that's a good example. Um,
But it's so true because then you're reading it and you're like, this feels like a cash grab. Like, and
yeah.
this didn't feel
Yes.
that. Because I
Yeah.
have several of those books too. Recently, I had to DNF the second. Like we won't, like you said, we won't get into other
Yeah.
books. But
Maybe we'll save that for another
but
Yeah, I
episode.
yeah,
That might be
know.
fun.
That would.
that didn't feel like that in the sense it did feel like its own thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at what it written,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
it's not like my
You wouldn't
next
recommend it.
favorite. But I mean, I would recommend it if you're like I would recommend it to anybody who likes The Shining.
Okay.
Or sometimes the opposite, like people just enjoy it for what it is and they don't need the second. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
yeah,
was
it's up to
another.
you if you want to know how the characters develop years
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
change years later.
All right. So going to the ending, what did you think of the novel's ending and climax? Was the final psychic battle and Rose the Hat's fate satisfying?
Yes.
In the epilogue, Dan reaches 15 years of sobriety and gently warns Abra about their
Yeah.
family's cycle of anger and addiction. Did the ending provide a
Mhm.
meaningful closure for Dan and Abra's stories? Why or why not? I think yes. I think like based on our previous
Yeah,
question, like
definitely.
we kind of agree. Like it's nice how it just kind of rounded out for Danny.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially given his history of trauma and,
Mm-hmm.
like, him feeling as if he has no family there for him anymore, or rather supportive
Mhm.
family. Yes, I do. I think that was a nice little comeback come back to Jesus moment, maybe like where it just circles
Mhm.
back, and him getting
Yeah, it's like a full
family
circle
again.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and him.
Yeah, it's a nice full circle moment.
Right. I think that's another reason too why I like that, because you don't often see that in horror novels where the protagonist gets like a success or a victory, I suppose you can say.
Like it's usually
Hmm.
pretty bleak, even if they survive. It's just like, well,
Yes.
at what cost?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not so I like epilogues. I like, oh, I guess there's more.
Mhm.
But in this sense, I liked it because, and this is also subjective because I struggle with like open-ended or like what's the word? Like what's the word? Like when you can just the ending, it's like
Like it just drops
not
off.
open.
Like when you just kind
Yeah,
of
or like
infer what
it's just
happens.
yes, this was like, okay, this is like his final, like it again, like was closure for me. Like I knew what happened at the end. I know he said this to Abra, or this is the way it ended. And it was like, yes, like he ends with his own like victory almost.
Hmm.
So yeah, I feel like it was just a nice full circle closure moment
Yeah.
Like
to
I
end
think
the
it would have
book
been
on.
upsetting, like if Dan had, everything he went through in The Shining and this for it
Mhm.
to just like, say like, oh, Abra dies,
Fall
he
through.
loses her, or like, you
Even if
know,
he
Yes,
died.
yeah.
like if he
Yeah.
died. I know the movie does take a different
Yes.
Yeah.
route. We'll leave it at that just because,
Okay.
spoilers. Like, the movie does kind of go a different direction from the book, but specifically for the book and the way like it plays out. I'm pretty happy
I
with how it
agree.
ended. He's
Hmm.
kind of at peace with himself. He has, even if he didn't have like Abra and like his half sister, he still does kind of get that sense of
Hmm.
community with like the people that looked out for him, his AA folks, the sponsors, the people at the hospice who really respect him and his job. Like it's just nice to see he was able to finally like find a community to rally for.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And also note too, like let's say if he ended up not having a relationship with Abra, and if he had did this on his own, because let's be honest, this probably would have ultimately led to Dan going back to the Overlook Hotel.
Hmm.
Like
With
all paths would have just like
Yeah,
taken him at there
yes,
at some
because it
point.
was always calling him. I think
Hmm.
him having to gone through that battle and whatnot, I think it also served sort of like a huge confident boost to him, knowing like he can do what he wants if he puts his mind to it, and perhaps maybe that is what
Mm.
helps him with this 15 years staying sober.
Hmm.
I think that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just basing off a stereotype, but you would think that that would do a lot for somebody who's probably suffering through something as dark as
Hmm.
depression, to be rewarded with something like that through their hard work and perseverance and just, yeah.
Yeah, and
Right.
it also kind of goes back to like like how like him realizing the Overlook doesn't have that power over him. He's not that same child that he was when he first came to the Overlook. He's like what 30 years older.
Yeah.
He's lived a harsh
Hmm.
life. Like that's definitely a big confidence boost right there, and
Yeah.
just kind of like I'm a different person now. I'm stronger. You don't have you can't have
Yeah.
any of this. You can't have me. You can't have these people.
Yeah.
I'm strong.
Yeah. He's
Hmm.
stoic.
So, as far as that goes, that's pretty much the end of our question. So, just like final thoughts on the book. What did you guys think? Is this a series you would probably like to revisit? I know we talked briefly about the movie, like, how, you've seen it, you haven't seen it. I personally haven't seen it, but I've always heard great things about it. Like, what was just your thoughts and like everything about this experience reading now both The Shining and Doctor Sleep?
Hmm. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I read The Shining. I'm glad I read Doctor Sleep to kind of just finish off the series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I uh would pick them up again, but I would definitely watch Doctor Sleep, and I am going to watch Doctor Sleep coming into
Yeah.
Halloween week here. It's like the perfect opportunity, it's perfect time,
Oh,
so
for
it's fresh on my
sure.
Yeah.
mind. Uh, as just recently finishing the book, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if Doctor Sleep was my favorite in terms of maybe my reading experience again. Like I said, like from beginning to end, but the points that I really did enjoy, like I was invested in, and I'm glad that I read it. And I think that the take on the whole hospice stuff really left a print
Yeah.
on me. Being that I have my dad works in hospice, and that's something that's kind of always been very much talked about in my family. And seeing death as kind of like a peaceful thing. So just reading that in a book is like, wow, that's what
Yeah.
I've
That's how
always seen
you
it
were
personally.
familiar
So
with it. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, so reading that was really, almost comforting in a way. So
So I loved it. I know I said this before. I loved it so much to where,
Spoiler alert, Michelle loved it.
yeah, I loved it so much when I went to a trip in the UK. I looked for that book. I love Stephen King so much. I went to a bookstore, went to Stephen King's area, and I got the British edition of Doctor Sleep. Because
yeah.
it's so pretty. And yeah, when I was I like to, before you do podcasts, I like to do like an overview of the book so I don't
Would you
forget
say an
anything.
overlook?
An overlook, yes.
Uh,
Yeah, and it definitely made me want to go and reach for that book and grab it down.
yeah.
So I don't know. I think I might read it again. I don't know. Yeah, because I do
Yeah.
really like it. And I, like, to this day, I still stop and think and reflect and be like, why do I really like it? Because I don't know why. It's just something about this book. I just really like it. I don't know what it is.
Personally, I think it was easier to read than The Shining. It was longer, I believe, than Shining, but easier to get into, and I do think I enjoyed it more than The Shining. Not that The Shining was bad by all means. Like that was a fun read. It was an interesting read. But I don't know. It was just like something about like knowing that everything like does end up working out for Dan.
Mhm.
But yeah, really enjoyed this book. I think if y'all want to give it a try, check it out. We have it available on cloudLibrary with our library card. So make sure you do go register for that if you haven't already. And if you don't have a library card, we'll give you the dirty stare. Lauren will give you a dirty stare because, again, she's all about library cards. And so are we. So by all means, go check it out. But with that said, again, thank you so much for joining us today, Lauren, and thank you, Michelle, for
Thank
hopping on
you.
this
It's
discussion. We love it anytime, you can come and, share your thoughts about the book that we read. And one more time, for anyone that might be introduced to you through this episode for the first time, where can they find you online?
I'm most active on Instagram at Lauren's Library Card, where I share reviews and my library savings and all things library.
Heck yeah, and as a library, we love to hear it.
Yep. Also, happy Halloween, guys.
Yeah, happy Halloween. So excited. But with that said, thank you guys for joining us today on this episode of BiblioTech on Air. Again, if you're curious about The Shining or Dr. Sleep, go check them out. Thanks for listening. I'm Rosanna.
And I'm Michelle.
And we'll catch y'all on the next episode. Bye.